Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing some Treasured Wildflower cards. Now, Spellbinders came out with some Treasured cardstock about a year ago in gold, rose gold, and silver. This year, they are releasing it in ruby, onyx, antique, which is that creamy white color, and then aquamarine. Now, each one of these packages has 15 sheets of specialty cardstock in it. There are 5 different finishes, so there's 3 sheets of each finish, and I use these all the time. So they came out with these last year. I use them all the time. I really do my best to stretch them out. Anytime I'm using specialty cardstocks, I stretch them out, and I'll share some of the ways that I do that in this video. So I'm going to be using all 4 of those colors in this video, as well as a little bit of the gold glitter one from last year's gold pack. I'm using the Lisa Horton Wildflowers collection, or a few things from it. So I'm using the Layered Wildflowers die set. I'm also using the Scalloped and Stitch Edge Ovals die set, as well as the Script BetterPress plate. We're going to do the Script BetterPress plate for the background for the cards, and I'm working on some distress watercolor cardstock. I'm going to do a technique with some water on it. We're doing an emboss resist technique, but using a press plate. So I want to make sure that I'm using cardstock that can handle that moisture. So I put that watercolor cardstock on the clear part of my BetterPress system. I put some embossing powder tool on there to make sure that that embossing that I'm going to be putting on there is only going to stick to the Versamark ink. I inked my plate with some Versamark ink, and I inked it twice just to make sure that I didn't miss any spots. Put that clear plate onto the base and ran it through my Platinum 6 machine for that pressure. For the first one here, I'm going to emboss it with some black embossing powder. So I pour that on there, and when I'm doing press plate embossing, I do like to use superfine embossing powder because those metal plates press into that cardstock. Some of those areas are really, really fine. So I use superfine embossing powder just to make sure that I can get it in all those nooks and crannies. Once I take the excess off, I put it back into the container and then use my embossing tool to melt that powder. So it needs to go from the matte granular finish that it has when it comes right out of the bottle, and when you melt it, it goes and it turns into a nice glossy, shiny finish. And that embossing is going to resist the inks that we're going to be using. So I want to make sure as I'm doing this that that entire surface is totally embossed. So as I'm doing it, I am tilting it into the light a little bit just to make sure that I can see that it's gone from that matte to that glossy shiny. I want to make sure that I don't miss any areas. And especially with a background like this, with the script, it's got so many nooks and crannies to it that it's really easy to miss an area if you're not paying attention. So I'm doing it nice and carefully, making sure that I have everything completely embossed. Then I can set that to the side, and I'm going to repeat the same process, but the second one, I'm going to emboss it with white embossing powder. And this way you're going to be able to see the look or how it looks with either the black background or the black embossing or the white embossing. And the white embossing could actually even be done with clear embossing powder because we're using white watercolor cardstock. I just use the white embossing powder simply because I've used this press plate before, and sometimes there might be a tiny little bit of ink left on there, and sometimes if there's ink left on there, it can look a little bit dingy. So by using that white embossing powder, I can make sure that my background or my embossed area here looks nice and crisp and bright. So with that done, I can put my BetterPress system away, get my scrap piece of paper, and now I'm going to pour that white embossing powder. And this too is also super fine embossing powder to make sure that it gets in all those nooks and crannies. Now, because I'm working white on white here, you're not going to be able to see it quite as easily as you'll see it, or that you saw that on the black. So I have some of the embossing part in the video cut out simply because you can't actually see the embossing powder and you can't really see it change. So it doesn't really look like anything, but it's exactly the same process as the black embossing powder, just not very visible on the white here. Now, when I compare the two of them, you can see the white on white, you can see the shiny on the watercolor cardstock, but again, not so easy when you're looking at it while it's embossing. For this next part of the technique, I'm going to use my Tim Holtz Media Mat. This is perfect for doing distress style backgrounds. I'm not using distress inks though. I'm going to be using 2 Cloud9 metallic inks. These are from Lisa Horton Crafts, as well as 2 color shift ink pads, and those are new from Lisa Horton Crafts. So the two metallic ones I'm using are Mojito and Verdigris, and the two color shift ones I'm using are Summer Sky and Avocado Gold. So the metallic pads have a metallic finish to them. The color shift pads have a color shifting but shimmery property to them, and they do have a little bit of opacity to the color shift pads. Not completely opaque, so they're not going to cover the embossing, but they do have a little bit to them. The same way that you do distress style backgrounds, that's how this is done. I'm doing both backgrounds at the same time, and typically I don't do two at the same time, but I wanted to make sure that I had even amounts of all the same colors. I wanted my backgrounds to look similar other than the embossing on them. So by doing them at the same time, I can make sure that I don't happen to have one color over the other. And you can see how I'm drying one of them while I'm dipping the other one in. For the drying part, I'm not using my embossing tool. The embossing tool, the heat on it is too strong, so I'm using my Ranger Heat It tool. This is a little bit more gentle. It looks like a blow dryer, but it's not a blow dryer. A blow dryer blows air, and sometimes you can get it to blow hot air, but a heat tool emits heat. So this is just a bit of a gentler heat than an embossing tool, but it's perfect for drying mediums, drying inks and stuff like that. You can see that I do have some white areas on my backgrounds here, and I'm doing that on purpose. I want my backgrounds to just have a little bit of randomness to them. I want to see all the different colors. I want to see those colors blending into each other, but I do still want to see a little bit of that white background. Sometimes when I'm doing the backgrounds, I don't want any white, and I will make sure that those are covered. For these, I liked the way it was looking with those white areas, so I left it at that. And as I'm working on my backgrounds here, I'm kind of looking at the colors, seeing where there should be some other colors. So on some of them, I see that my turquoise is just on one side, so I'll make sure to get a little bit of turquoise on the other side to try balance it out. Same with my greens. I will see there's some light greens or dark greens in certain areas, so I will try press it into the areas where I have kind of an even amount of color. And I'll just keep continuing this until I have the look that I want. Typically, I don't have to reapply ink to my mat. If you are working on your background and you aren't completely done, or you're not quite happy with your result and you want more ink on it, wipe your mat off and just start the process over again to get more ink on there. Now, because we're working with metallic ink pads as well as color shifting pads, and those color shifting pads have some shimmer properties to them, these backgrounds are going to have some areas that have a little bit metallic to them and other areas that have a little bit of shimmer. Now, I am working with these Treasured Cardstock packs that have different metallic finishes to them. So there's one cardstock that has glitter, one that has pearl, one that has a matte metallic, one that's shiny metallic, and one that's brushed metallic. But even though I have all of those different textures, and I'm not using all of the different textures in this video, the shimmer and the metallic on my background is very subtle because it's mixed with water. So it's going to be a nice balance. You're going to see just a touch of that. It's not in your face shimmer, but it creates a really beautiful background for these flowers. Now for the sentiments of my cards, I'm using the Very Best Wishes stamp and die set, and I'm going to emboss my sentiments, my stamp sentiments, on white hammermill cardstock with some black embossing powder. I already have some that were embossed with gold for a previous video, and I'm just using one of the leftovers for that. This stamp and die set creates several sub-sentiments all at once. Anytime I have extra sentiments, I just leave them in a Ziploc bag right in my stamp and die set package, so that next time I want to use this, I might already have a sub-sentiment done and ready to go. And in this case, I did. I had one that was gold embossed from a previous video that is going to work perfectly for one of my cards here. And I'm making two cards. One of my cards is going to have the ruby and the onyx treasured cardstock in it, and the other one is going to have the antique, which is the pearly white or the white color, and the aquamarine. So the ruby and onyx is going to have the sentiments here that have the black embossing, and then the other one is going to have the one that has gold embossing, because that's going to be some daisies, and I did bring in the gold glitter cardstock for the centers of those daisies. So here my background is completely dry. When I use my Heat It tool, I dry it mostly, but I needed time to do a little bit of die cutting anyway, so I just let the rest of it dry on the side, all on its own. And even while you're working on those backgrounds, you can let them dry naturally. The heated tool just speeds it up a little bit. So I have a little bit of that ruby matte metallic cardstock there that I'm going to be using for my mat around my card. That is trimmed to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. My distress background with that press plate script on there is going to be trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And you can see that I have all of these areas that I have die cut my poppies for this particular card. This distressed pressed background here is going to cover all of that. And this is how I stretch that specialty cardstock a little bit more. So in that same piece that I'm using as a mat around my card, I have die cut the pieces for my poppy. I've die cut one of the shadows for my wishes die cut. And it just means that your cardstock is going to go far. There's no point in having a piece of specialty cardstock that you're using as a mat and covering most of it with part of your card. You might as well use that area to die cut it. And because I'm using nice thick cardstock for my card base, and because that distressed watercolor cardstock for my pressed and distressed background there is nice and thick, you can't see that there's anything die cut out of there. So for this card, I'm also using the Onyx glitter finish. So I'm using that for the centers of my flowers. I'm also using it for that wishes die cut. I used it for the bow that's going to tie my flowers together. And then I also used it for the scallop frame that I'm going to have on my card here. So that was all die cut out of 1/4 of a sheet of that glitter finish Onyx treasured cardstock. So I'm getting a lot out of that cardstock, and there's still pieces left, or still a bit left, that I'm going to put in my specialty cardstock scrap bin that I'll be using for future projects. So I can get quite a few projects out of just a little bit of this treasured cardstock because I die cut it in ways that stretches it. So when I'm thinking about die cutting it, I'm mindful of what I want to use this piece for. So if I want to use it as a mat, I make sure to put my dies a little bit away from the edge so that I can easily use it as a mat on my card. When I die cut the pieces for the glitter, I did my scalloped oval here first, and then the oval that is left over from the center, that's where I die cut the other pieces from once this scalloped oval was die cut. I also have the frame from around the outside of that scalloped oval. I put that in my scrap bin. I'm not going to be using it in this video, but it can be easily used for die cutting some smaller pieces. I could also even use it as a mat around another card. The one thing to keep in mind though with glitter cardstock is it does take a little bit longer for your glue to dry. I'm using Barely Art glue and I use it for pretty much everything that I create. There's a few things that it doesn't work well for. I have it in a nice fine line bottle, and I do love using a liquid glue because it goes a little bit farther, or it goes quite a bit farther. You can use a little bit or you can use a lot, and it gives you some wiggle room to move things around. But when you're working with specialty cardstocks, you do need to let those things dry for just a little bit longer because those specialty cardstocks have coatings on them. The glue doesn't absorb right into them. So you do need to be patient and let that dry for just a little bit longer, and especially when it comes to glitter cardstock. Glitter cardstock, it will absolutely dry with a liquid glue, but you need to let it dry for just a little bit longer. So as I have all of my pieces on my card here, I do put my acrylic block on there. I use my acrylic block all the time. It just holds everything down nice and flat, and it frees up my hands to work on other things. So here's this first card finish with that distressed background done with those color shift pads as well as the metallic pads. It adds a really nice contrast to the flowers as well as the frame and my sentiment. For my second card here, this is the pressed distressed background with the white embossing. I'm trimming that down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. My sizes, my dimensions are going to be the same as my first card. For this one, because I use some of the glitter gold cardstock for the center of my daisies, or I'm going to, you haven't seen it yet, as well as my wishes, I wanted to add a little bit of gold to the background. So I'm using the watercolor mixing set with a little bit of water, my Yasutoma brush, and I'm just putting some gold splatters on the back. Now these gold splatters are really tiny, so they're going to dry super, super quick. So I put those gold splatters on there, set that aside to dry, and by the time I have my die cuts assembled, ready to add to the front of my card, those gold splatters will be all dry and ready to go. So for this card, I'm using the Aquamarine Treasured Cardstock, and I'm using that one in the matte metallic. I have that done with the frame. I'm also matting it around the outside of that pressed and distressed background, as well as the bow, and then I have it for one of the shadows for my wishes. My flowers are die cut from the antique pearl metallic. So the pearl metallic has a little bit of pearly opalescent look to it, but it also has a tiny subtle gold shimmer to it. So it works really well for these daisies, and it coordinates beautifully with that gold glitter that I have in the center of those daisies. So the gold glitter cardstock is from the gold treasured cardstock that was released last year. For my wishes, for both of my cards here, I did the triple layers for my wishes, but you can easily change that and just do a double layer. So do your wishes word plus one shadow. I have 2 shadows for both. So my wishes word is done with that gold glitter cardstock as well. And this glitter cardstock die cuts beautifully. Even something as intricate as that wishes sentiment, it die cuts beautifully. I've never ever had an issue with it. I've die cut it with intricate die cuts many times, and I've never had an issue with those dies not going through that cardstock. So every single one of the finishes from these treasured cardstocks, they die cut absolutely beautifully. So I can glue down my Aquamarine matte. Then I'm gluing down my distressed and pressed background here with that white script in the background. And again, these sizes are exactly the same as the first card. So my Aquamarine matte metallic matte is 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. My distressed pressed background there is 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And I made sure that those were big enough so that when I put the scalloped oval down, I still had a little bit of area around that. Once I have that oval frame down, I first put my stems down and make sure that I have those arranged exactly how I want. And sometimes I will put those over top of my acrylic block just to test that the arrangement I have or I'm thinking of in my head is going to work how I think it's going to work. You can see that sometimes I will put the heads of the flowers on first, and then sometimes I'll put the bow on first. I kind of, in general, have a method to this, but sometimes I get ahead of myself and I change up that method as well. Once I have that bow on, and that bow was die cut out of that Aquamarine matte metallic, I'm gluing on those daisy heads. And next I will do the sentiments and the sub-sentiments. Now, last card, I did both of them below the bow. This time I'm going to do that sub-sentiment right above the bow, just kind of a little bit behind it, just to give it a little bit of a different look from my first card. And then the wishes is going at the bottom. After that, I can take all of my leaves and I can tuck those into some open areas. I typically will do my leaves last because I find that they're great for doing or for using as little fillers. So they work perfectly. Once you have most of your design ready to go, they're perfect for just tucking in little areas. And because I'm using that liquid glue, if by chance I want to tuck it in an area where I've already glued down, I can easily lift it up because that glue has some wiggle room with its drying time. So it's not going to dry immediately. You'll have a little bit of forgiveness there, a little bit of allowance to lift something up, to tuck something behind it. So here's that second card with those daisies, with both the antique as well as the Aquamarine treasured cardstock pack, and then my distressed and pressed background there, which is a great background that coordinates both with that treasured cardstock as well as creating a great background for those flowers. The second card with the poppies done with that Onyx and that ruby treasured cardstock. And you can see how even though I used color shift and metallic pads for that background, it creates a nice background for it. It doesn't conflict with those treasured metallic cardstocks that I've used for those die cuts. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spent with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.